thank you all for being here for our last session of today, where we're delighted to have a panel on the future of international education that's going to be moderated by our esteemed colleague, Tammy Rosner. Tammy's the Director of International Education at the University System of Georgia, so the Senior International Officer for the USG system, and she provides system-wide leadership for strategic planning, policy, interpretation, and coordination of international education initiatives. She provides structure and support for international collaborations, sharing best practices, and advocating for internationally focused programs. And she created and oversees the USG Study Abroad Consortia program known as USG Goes Global. She was a Fulbright Scholar in Germany in 2005. She's been an active member of international organizations at the state, regional, and national levels by holding leadership roles in presenting. And I would also add a real champion for international virtual exchange, and somebody I've been fortunate enough to be able to present with and co-author a piece for Diversity Abroad on the sort of equity in international virtual exchange. So please give a warm welcome to Tammy. And our panel, are you going to introduce the panelists? Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you.
Hello. This is on. Okay, hello. Thank you, Tony, for introducing me and saying such nice things about me. And welcome, everyone, to this panel. I'm honored to be working with our panelists, and I hope you agree that we have captured an impressive mix of perspectives for our conversation today. A discussion regarding the future of international education is so important right now as we reflect on the dramatic changes brought to us and that brought out the fragility of our international programs, but also allowed the resilience and innate hope that exists in all that we do in international education. The panel before you represents leaders in our field that not only create the best practices we follow, but are also voices of advocacy for our students and colleagues and exemplars of the collaborative and inclusive spirit at the heart of international education. I will say quickly, I've attended several sessions today, and the theme is people. We're all here talking about people and how we can work collaboratively and inclusively with all others, and I think this is a great panel to represent that. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now. I'll do it in the order that you're sitting. So we have Tina Rousselot de Saint-Céran, is a PhD student in the Learning, Leadership, and Organizational Development program at the University of Georgia. She also serves as the Director of International Student and Scholar Services at the Georgia Institute of Technology, where she oversees immigration and support services for international students, scholars, and their families. She is a past chair of the NAFSA Association of International Educators Knowledge Community for International Student and Scholar Services, an active trainer in NAFSA trainer corps, and past chair of the South Carolina Association of International Education. Next, we have Patrick Wallace. He's a program specialist for world languages and global workforce initiatives at the Georgia Department of Education. Patrick oversees statewide world language initiatives, including the International Skills Diploma Seal, the Seal of Biliteracy, and Georgia's Dual Language Immersion Initiative. He provides support to world language teachers in all K-12 language programs in Georgia. Farrah Bernardino is the Senior Director in the Office of International Initiatives here at Georgia State. In this capacity, she serves as the Deputy to the Associate Provost for International Initiatives, playing a key role in implementing strategic initiatives for the office. She has over 15 years' experience working in international education, both at Georgia State and at NAFSA, where she supported senior international officers in their campus internationalization strategies. And last but not least is Dr. Togunde, who serves as the Vice Provost for Global Education and Professor of International Studies at Spelman College. His role includes providing leadership for the design and implementation of the college's strategic planning on campus internationalization and the institutionalization of Spelman Going Global, which is the centerpiece of the college's reaffirmation of accreditation. Excuse me. Sorry, one of my hairs was on there and it was really bothering me. He's in charge of Spelman Going Global, which is the centerpiece of the college's reaffirmation of accreditation by SAC-COC. With more than 2 decades of leadership experience in the development and implementation of strategic planning on campus internationalization, Professor Togunde's internationalization philosophy is anchored on the shared vision and building consensus. He recognizes that it is imperative for students and faculty to be knowledgeable about global issues and to acquire the skills they need to navigate the diverse global cultural landscapes so they can function effectively as global leaders. So we're going to dive right into the questions. We're going to start with a question about COVID. So there's no question that COVID changed many facets of international education. How have changes in class delivery affected the content, design, and offering of international programs? What new pedagogies have emerged, and what will continue to change and adapt? Farrah?
Hi, everyone. And first of all, let me just say thank you for coming to the last session of the day on a Friday. Appreciate that. So at Georgia State, we really saw the pandemic really pushed us to focus more on our non-mobility programs. We saw the changes that were associated with classroom deliveries and opportunity to advance our virtual exchange initiative in particular. So if you're not familiar with what virtual exchange is, in its simplest description of it, it is a high-impact practice where you're connecting students across countries using technology. So as an example, you may have a faculty here at Georgia State who wants to work with a faculty at the University of Cairo and work collaboratively with their students. So you might give the students, put them in mixed teams, give them a case or a problem to solve at the beginning of the semester. Throughout the semester, they're working collaboratively together through technology, and at the end of the semester, they're presenting solutions. There's a variety of technology that faculty use in virtual exchange: Flipgrid, VoiceThread, WhatsApp, Zoom. There will be more and more technologies. So there's really a lot of flexibility in terms of what faculty choose to use. But the important thing is just the intercultural connection, the intercultural communication, the intercultural competence that virtual exchange offers. And a benefit of it is that it is discipline independent. So faculty from all different disciplines can get involved and implement virtual exchange. Another project that we have going on is a sociology professor is looking at comparative global perspectives on aging. So that's an example from sociology. And I think that virtual exchange is certainly here to stay. It's definitely growing at a high speed at Georgia State. And the wonderful thing about it is that it provides access to more global education opportunities for our students. We're going to talk more about virtual exchange later in the program, but I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome you to this session. On the onset of COVID-19 outbreak, we had 28 students in 14 countries during the March of 2020. So the task was to find a frantic way, very stressful moment. I've never seen a much more stressful life during that period to get 28 students in 14 countries back home. But at the same time, we began to think about how we can continue with our global engagement, despite the fact that in-person travel abroad will be suspended. And to what extent, we don't know. So what we did at Spelman College was to create virtual global internship opportunities for students. We swung into action, got a lot of our providers to create virtual global internship. So it bodes well for our strategy to prepare our students for global engagement and career opportunities. So we had 8 students sign up for the fall of 2020. So that's one aspect of the pedagogy that were created as a result of the pandemic. Unfortunately, it continues, but on a lower scale right now. Actually, we don't have any student who signed up for it. I see this as a continuation of the role of technology in the delivery of learning and global education. Secondly, we decided to create what is called virtual exchange for globally focused courses. So my office is responsible for asking faculty to develop courses that will be infused with international content. And so what we did was to ask faculty if they have any contact with their collaborators outside the United States who would like to bring their classroom as part of the ongoing classroom that is going on here. It could be a module that on a similar topic. We also use the role of our providers. We use IAS abroad and say, look, you have contacts and your faculty in different locations. We want to partner with you and connect our faculty with them on courses or topics within the range of what you have in different locations. That will enable our faculty to bring your faculty and your students as guest speakers, and it worked very well. So up till now, we continue to run this model as part of our internationalization of the curriculum. And thirdly, we also utilize the global hackathon perspective, which we, I don't want to say copy or steal, but which we adapted from the Atlanta Global Studies Center. So this enables our faculty, again, to find a way to collaborate with local organizations within Atlanta and incorporate elements of what we consider local problems that have global ramifications and engage their students in using Atlanta as a laboratory for this type of engagement. We see this as a pedagogy that will continue regardless of the pandemic or not. It has started before the pandemic, but it gained momentum because a lot of faculty and students were unable to travel. So it becomes a natural adaptation to the changing landscape of where we are in global education and the future that we are going. So we're going to talk more about this, but these are the three dynamic ways in which we have adapted to what COVID brought and moving on to enhance global learning as Spellman.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to represent a slightly different perspective from the service side of the house, working with international student and scholar services during the pandemic. Within 2 days, we needed to convert from walk-in services to virtual services, and so it was quite a challenge. We were already planning to move to virtually delivered advising services. However, we were doing it very slowly and carefully testing, and so we didn't get a chance to do that. We had to move immediately to be able to meet with our students and really help support any questions that they might have about their immigration status or help support them with benefits, applying for those immediately. And so what we found in moving to a virtual advising space is that we're actually able to provide greater access to populations that we serve that are not in the Atlanta area. So for example, our new students who haven't arrived yet can join us in virtual advising and ask any questions that they might have. Our students who have already graduated and are participating in a period of post-completion OPT, which is a work authorization. Maybe they're out in California. They can now join our advising hours and do drop-in advising with us. In addition to that, greater access to advising services, we also found some innovative ways to use technology when we moved back to more in-person delivery, and that was our new students arriving for the fall often had many questions about, how can they navigate? Where do they get their driver's license, and where can they find some food, which bus goes here, which bus goes there, and so we actually set up a virtual help desk every fall, and we staff it with international students who have been at Georgia Tech for a while, and they help to answer some of those questions from a student perspective and engage with students. And what we find is that that's very helpful to them, because sometimes they might actually not be on campus when they're tapping into those services. They may be at a friend's house and they're Marietta, trying to learn about what they need to do that day to go over to the Department of Driver Services. So we certainly have found that technology has increased access to advising services, but I wanted to offer some insight from a recent Institute for International Education article from their the IIE networker. Andrew Gordon of Includify says, we need to be mindful that in using technology that we can disproportionately affect those without access to technology or all of the technology services that we have. And so this came to light for me recently. I met with a student who was coming to us from an area where they do not have good access to internet. And so he came and talked to me about his challenges with onboarding and how he really had gotten a little bit lost. And I asked him, I said, well, did you get our pre-arrival email communications? He said, no. I said, okay, well, did you take a look at our website, the new student guide, and look through some of the resources there? And he said, no, I didn't have access to internet. And it was a kind of an eye-opening experience for me after we've all gone through this global pandemic together and we were so connected. I think it's really important that we remember that there are still populations out there that do not have access to this technology. And so when we're designing technology solutions, there are 3 key questions that the IIE Network article says you might want to incorporate in your planning. So one of them is, how accessible is the technology product to those that your audience, right? How accessible is it? And how does the technology support student belonging and success? Is there an opportunity to complement the technology with something maybe that's delivered in person to create both an online community and an in-person community? The third question is, will staff be able to easily learn and manage the technology? And this is a really important question because we all know in higher education in particular, we're all very leanly staffed. And so as we implement new services, we need to make sure that we're not creating a learning curve that's too steep for our employees as well. It's good for them to learn, but we also need to make it accessible to them. So in summary, I think we found that technology does provide greater access to most students. And I would say, in addition to that, I think we need to be very careful and mindful that not everyone has access to these resources.
Thank you, Tina. That's a good segue to our next question. What different strategies have been employed by your international programs to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I think I'm up first on this one, and so I'll go ahead and get started. I think one of the most important parts of really enhancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly as we think about international students and any other marginalized students at our institutions, is to really think about how are we hearing the voice of these students? Do we have mechanisms in place for them to provide feedback on their experience at the institutional level? One of the things that we've done at Georgia Tech is we created an International Student Advisory Committee. This is a group of students that works with us to really help us put together focus groups of other international students and go through some important questions about their experience. This helps us identify, what are we doing well? And really express gratitude to those that have put those things in place. And then what are some ways that we could improve the international student experience at Georgia Tech? So if you don't have a student advisory committee for your office, it may be something that you could set up. I think you'll find that it is quite beneficial to hear directly from the students about their experience, what they'd like to see, and what hasn't been going well. In addition to that, we did create a new program that is a leadership development program specifically for international students, where we look at things like culture and understanding how culture is acquired, and understanding the experience of being placed in a new culture and some of the changes that the brain goes through, and that the experience that sometimes creates for the student, and really some of the challenging things and lots of opportunity for growth that are available in those cultural experiences in a place that is not of your own culture. In addition to that, I think we talk about in that program bias, microaggressions. We also talk about really looking at the world in a very decolonial way to understand that there are multiple ways of knowing, there are multiple ways of being, and all of them are equally valid. And so I think understanding, particularly we're here in the U.S., and I want to point out that we have very Western ways of knowing, but there are other ways of really experiencing the world and other ways of being, and they tend to think about things slightly differently than us, and I think we could learn a lot by really being accepting and open to new ways of knowing and being. So certainly I think a leadership development program that's really focused on dialogue, that's focused on learning and development, focused on culture can be helpful. The other thing that I'll mention, and then I'll turn it over to the other panelists here, is I do think when you're thinking about working with students, whether they're education abroad students or international students, I think it's really important to understand that those first few weeks, if it's an ed abroad program, or that mid-semester for those international students coming here, are very difficult times for the student. They're very excited to go, but when they get there, they're experiencing new and confusing things, and can be experiencing some homesickness too. And so doing check-ins is very important. And so at Georgia Tech, we do something called the mid-semester meal, where we invite all of the new international students to come in, and we do a little dialogue on their experience so far in adjusting to culture, the new culture in the U.S. and how that's going, and we share resources to really help support them with that. I know probably many of you working with your international programs do the same. So checking in with those students who are new to this experience and really giving them an opportunity to dialogue with peers around that and access to resources during those critical months, I think is very important.
So one thing that has really helped us when we were designing our DEI initiatives is to conduct a demographic analysis of our global ed programs. So we do this with our Global Scholar Distinction Program, with our Free Passport Program, and with our study abroad in general. So we'll take our study abroad population and look at the demographics of it, compare it to our campus population, and also compare it to the national statistics. So to give you a snapshot of what study abroad looks like at Georgia State, 52% of our study abroad population are considered underrepresented racially or ethnically, which is well above the national average. 38% are Black students compared to 6.4% nationally, and 18% are Hispanic compared to 11% nationally. So when you're thinking about those demographics, it seems like, wow, we have a really healthy, diverse study abroad population, and we do. But in 2019, when we were looking at the data, we realized that our Black male students in particular are disproportionately underrepresented. And so we worked with our African American Male Initiative to submit for an IDEAS grant so we could do a better job understanding the concerns and to do better outreach there. So we conducted student surveys to Black male students and to our Black male faculty as well. And based off of the insights in those surveys, we conducted programmatic initiatives based off of that information. And I will say it was really helpful. If anybody wants to talk to me more in depth about that, the IDEAS program, I'm happy to talk to you after the program. We also our Free Passport Program, which we developed in the midst of the pandemic. It was really created as a way to make sure that we maintained momentum with students thinking about study abroad, and so that we had a quick rebound to students studying abroad once the travel started picking back up again. From qualitative and quantitative data, it has shown that it has been instrumental in creating a pipeline for underrepresented students to study abroad, and also our international education fee, without a doubt, plays an important role. Last year, we gave out $975,000 in study abroad scholarships, and I can say without a doubt that our study abroad population would look significantly different without that scholarships. So my recommendation is to really look at the data on your programs, but also on your student population. Where are the gaps? Where can you do a better job? And that has helped us to always be thinking that we can be doing better, even though we have a very diverse population.
For us at Spelman College, we employ a multifaceted approach to tackling the issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And because of our efforts, we have received an award from Diversity Abroad for excellence in diversity and inclusion in international education. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown I have a lot to say on this, and I wouldn't mind if people want to talk to me after. But one of the strategies that we have employed is that once a student has been accepted, or even when they are making a tour without making a decision to come to Spelman, we have faculty, we have students who have studied abroad before, who will talk about the value of study abroad at Spelman. So at Spelman College, one of our most learning aspects of the mission is to engage students with the rest of the world. And so my office, the Center for Global Education, is endowed with $17 million, purposely to ensure that every Spelman student has the opportunity to study abroad. So this was enshrined in the 2010-2017 strategic planning, and in 2017 to 2022 strategic planning. So we put our money where our mouth is. That's number one. So students who are prospectively looking at Spelman College has already been explained to the value of what it means to be globally connected. Secondly, we have done passport drive. So even though Spelman College is a women's institution, yet there is diversity in terms of first generation, socio-economic, in terms of other aspects of diversity. So we have taken this into consideration by ensuring quite strategically that students who are unable to afford the cost are offered scholarships. But before scholarships, demonstrating the importance of a global engagement is very, very important. You could throw money at people thinking that it will solve the problem. First of all, they need to appreciate why they want to study abroad, and we do that effectively. So the other thing that we have done is to draw faculty into the mainstream of global engagement. I often repeatedly say it, ACE is quite clear about it, that you cannot internationalize a faculty, internationalize the campus without internationalizing the faculty. Get faculty involved. They are the bedrock of the teaching and learning. They own the curriculum. Students know them. They trust them. So what we did was to create diversity of programs. Short-term programs during the spring break, 2 weeks program during the summer, faculty-led programs within respective departments. So 90% of the students who study abroad at Spelman go through the faculty. The remaining 10% are through the providers. So if we look at our data from 2011 to present situation, we have had an increase of 113% in the number of students who study abroad. Secondly, before COVID in 2019, 77% of the graduating class had had a global study experience, traveled outside the United States. So when we look at this, study abroad, for instance, has become an integral aspect that is so fundamental to Spelman education. Now, the other point I want to talk about is diversity of destinations. Now, if we look at the study abroad data, European destinations tend to be predominant. But we are very, very deliberate in ensuring that our students are able to connect with their heritage. So we have courses, we have students, we have faculty-led programs to Ghana, South Africa, to Morocco. So we have created a new program to Rwanda in order to ensure that students of African descent are able to connect with their heritage. But one other point that I wanted to mention is, and I think Tina mentioned this, Tammy mentioned this, mentioned this about decolonization of global education. What we did, and if we take a look at this, is mostly Eurocentric ideas are taught when students go and study abroad. So the perspectives are only based on non-European perspective. So I'm going to tell you what we did specifically in order to address this. Secondly, the teaching styles are not inclusive enough. So if we are talking about inclusive excellence, we need to take into consideration different learning styles of the students that are in the classroom. Most of the students, when they travel abroad and come back, they will talk about how white students will only hang out together. They do it also in the United States. International students tend to hang together. Why do they sit together at the cafeteria? Beverly Daniel Tatum, our former president, wrote a book on that. So it is not what permeates in the developed countries alone when they study abroad, but also in the United States. And efforts must be made to ensure there is that cross-pollination and cross-fertilization of ideas. Now, the other point is who teach these courses that our students take abroad? Mostly white faculty again, who lack training and understanding of African-American issues, African-American history. So what we do as Spelman deliberately is what I'm going to talk next. So mostly European destinations, mostly taught by white faculty from Eurocentric perspective, and who benefits from the teaching is the same affluent white kids. So what happens to the underrepresented minority students with less than 7% of them who study abroad in a year? So what we have done is to look at, I have a clearly identified set of points that I want to come across. Now, one is that every syllabus that we have for faculty-led, since faculty-led dominates our study abroad, it must include topics or activities that will enable students to connect with the readings on other black people of African descent. When Alex Pierre went to Peru, they visited the slave plantation. The idea was to let our students engage in a comparative analysis of the similarities and differences between the experience of the black people in the United States and black people who are in other culture. So when our students go to Ghana, they will go to Cape Coast in order to see the slave castle where Africans were shipped to the rest of the world. Secondly, the intersectionality of race, class, and gender are also covered in almost the syllabus that our students take. And again, we have guest lectures by women who are employed in faculty-led programs. The idea is to enable our students to be able to connect with them, to be able to share similarities, and to engage them in a way that will show an appreciation of who they are while they are exploring their identities abroad. So we offer topics on thematic topics on human health, on health disparities, educational equity when they go to South Africa. So they are able to relate to issues of equity, issues of discrimination that other black people face in those countries, and relate to what exists in America that we'll continue to work upon. So I'll be glad to talk to anyone who wants to know the dynamics of this, but we are very deliberate, we are very intentional, and there's also an organic approach to this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, make sure we hear from Patrick. Like college students, K-12 students experienced over a year and a half of pandemic disruptions. Now that we have returned to more stable conditions, are high school graduates in Georgia going to college at higher or lower rates than before the pandemic?
Okay, first of all, it's great to be here. I'm Patrick. I work with the K-12 space, so I'm a little different from everyone else up here. My learners are just starting off, but I think that we are the feeder for all of our universities, so it's really, really important what we do. I think what we see in general, if you look over the data over the last few years, there's a small decline in the number of students going into four-year programs, I think, nationally. But that said, we have some great programs, and I think what I see is more of a sort of a merging of our spaces, if I'm to be honest, because really we're thinking about, for example, a program like dual enrollment, where students who are in high school can also get college credit. That program has expanded dramatically. I think when it was first put into place, there might have been a budget of $27 million. It's well over $125 million now, with more and more students taking part in that. And at first, we didn't have a number of African-American students or Latino students initially, but we have caught up now in that program as well. I also feel like that program has indicated as well that there's a great need in the rural community to access. You might think that a lot of dual enrollment students are in the metro area, but the majority of them are actually in rural situations, and they just don't have access to language programs. They don't have access to AP courses. They don't have access to staff. I know in world language that is a critical thing I deal with above all else is staffing, particularly when it comes to dual language immersion. So I think we really have to I always talk about the pandemic being a disruptor. It was, but disruptions are also great opportunities for innovation. And I think we see that already in each of our spaces. In the K-12 space, we've seen that as well. There's much more connection with the internet, much more virtual options that have opened up, but we quickly realized that virtual was not alone going to do it. I always talk about a rubber band being stretched, but when the pressure's off, the rubber band goes back to it doesn't go back to its original shape. So I think we've been through a rubber band stretch moment, and we are coming back from that, and the implications of it are still to be determined, but we are not going to be the shape we did when we entered the pandemic. I think it was an accelerant in the virtual realm. I think our technical community colleges are also talking about how do we give students the essentials of what they need to be successful in the workplace. Instead of thinking about education in a traditional 4-year or 6-year program, thinking about it, what is it that we need to give them to be successful for the work they want to do when they leave this institution? Because the price is also a factor, right? So this is also something that, of course, has been in the news a lot about student debt and all of that as well. So we really need to really consider different ways of melding our communities together. I really feel like I operate in the K to workforce space. That's the way I see my space. I don't think of it as K-12. I think K to workforce. So we're all in this together. I think I would stress that. And we have some, and I really will say, I'll say that, and it's not just because I work for the state of Georgia and I know I'm on a time limit, but I would say that we in Georgia, we have some of the best, most cooperative agencies, including the Atlanta Global Studies Center and others, that really make it possible for us to interact in ways that other states around us are not. So we are really at the forefront in the Southeast of really initiating and sustaining change for our region.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and follow up on that with part of your work in the Georgia Department of Education focuses on global workforce development. So can you tell us more about the goals of the state to prepare students for work in certain fields or industries? And how do these projections relate to the need for proficient language speakers and globally competent professionals? And how are public schools preparing students to be globally focused or globally minded as they transition to college?
That is such a huge question, so I will be here for the next hour. I'll pick one aspect of that. Global education is really, whenever I start a presentation or I'm talking about what we do, I always start with a picture of the earth, because it's a reminder that our educational system does not exist in a vacuum by itself. And as someone related earlier, I think international travel and things like that, the benefit of learning a language a lot of times is just gaining that new perspective. It's essentially important, not only for a student abroad, but let's be honest, I always say world language, we put the us in USA because we can go anywhere and we can come from anywhere. Domestically, we are a very diverse audience. We have a growing diversity in our student body. So I think, how do we harness this? I think we need to continue to look for ways to, we have programs like our International Skills Diplomacy, which kind of highlights the study of having an international perspective. We just need to continue to try to build programs that meet schools where they are, that make a logical connection for them internationally. I'll give you an example. This is something recently I've been working on, which is connecting rural schools internationally. So if you can imagine, I mean, we're here in downtown Atlanta. It's much different if I drive 2 hours south. It's completely different in terms of diversity, completely different in many ways in terms of opportunity. You'll go to that high school and there'll be one Spanish teacher and it's all they can do to teach Spanish, to get the kids who are on college track, to get them those 2 years of language study. But they are very strong in agriculture, so how can we utilize what they already have? I always think about our CTAE pathways, to be honest, too. Connecting CTA pathways in a global scale within the K-12 environment, I think is going to be a real point of resonance. I think the closer and more language, sometimes we know the benefit of language study. We know the benefit of intercultural experiences. We've lived that personally in many ways. But how do we explain the importance of that in an economic argument? And I think that what I can say is that in Georgia, at least, more and more people are coming to understand that we need this type of education in our system. I'll give you another example. Interpreters, translators, definitely a growing market legally, medically, educationally. Systems are having to do more of that work. And so that will continue to be a thing. I think part of, for example, creating a CTA pathway for interpreters and for translators. One of the obstacles to us is that in the private sector, there are not many national certifications in those areas, and that keeps us from being able to connect and build a pathway in many ways, because we don't have a certification test at the end of it that's already approved that students could take. But if we had that, we could probably build a CTA pathway for those things. And I think those are occupations that are just going to be more and more important as our diversity continues to expand. And we're living in a global hub, so it's definitely, and there's a large or strong impetus to make economic connections, to take. We're building, I look at my job as building our workforce for the future. So when kids are graduating now, these are the kids that are going to work for our international companies. These are the kids who are going to work for international companies that call Georgia home. So in order to continue that economic engine where we want our Georgia-grown companies to expand abroad, and also to attract international investment in our state, we're going to have to invest in world language education to make that connection for them, because that is a real point of resonance. Many of these, for example, if it's an international business that comes here, they're coming with workers. Those workers have children. Those children will be here for 2 or 3 years, and then maybe they'll go home. But finding an education that also works for their children while they're here is also an economic advantage for us if we are ahead of the curve in relation to the states around us. And I think by simply having someone at the Department of Ed, you might think that every Department of Ed within our nation has someone who oversees world language. I can say as president for the National Council for State Supervisors for Languages, that is not the case. There's probably 30 states of which I have someone in my office who I'm directly connected with. Florida just got a person a month and a half ago, and I visited the Florida Department of Ed in Tallahassee to explain my work to them and what I did. So I think that just blows my mind in many ways. You think Florida is very diverse. I'm thinking Miami, I'm thinking all of this. But so there's some structures in the governmental setting too that also nationwide need to come more to understanding of the importance of the work that goes on to support global and dual language immersion. I always say language is a river. We can do anything on it, right? I mean, our dual language immersion kids, and I mean, I've walked into these classrooms, they're teaching science and math and Spanish, French, German, Mandarin, Korean, Japanese. And you would think, how does that happen? How is here is a third grader that speaks better Japanese than many adults I know who learned it as a second language. So, and there's all kinds of cognitive benefits to that. So if you get kids already in that path and then they're hitting AP by 9th or 10th grade, suddenly they're going to be in dual enrollment programs to meet their level. We can't offer Spanish 5 and 6 at our high schools. So putting them on that itself is a body that's growing. So I'm talking 7,000, 8,000 students now, but growing. We have 80 programs. That's up from 30 just 4 or 5 years ago. So, I mean, you're talking about a new... Change will come. Change is on its way. It's in your schools now, K-12. Go read the newspaper, but it's coming your way. So for the higher institutions, my goal is always, hey, let's work together. Let's break down these walls. You guys are already in our space. I really think they're going to have to be more competitive in the K-12 space, honestly, because they have to sell their programs at the K-12. By the time they're here, but it's the people that aren't coming here or there that you're thinking about, like, how do I attract students to my programs? How do we keep world language programs and foreign language programs alive at the university level? You're going to have to start marketing and going down into the K-12 system and get more connected with that to sell them on what you're offering. And then you also have to be more creative in thinking about your programs at the higher ed level to fit their needs. So that's why that communication piece is so important. You got to listen more than you speak. They say you have 2 ears for that reason, only one mouth, right? So yeah, it's just, we're in a great space, but we need to continue to work on this. We're by no means solve the problem. But I am thankful to be in Georgia because we have I always talk about family. We are family. That's the way I look at it.
I see your hand, but we're going to hold till the very end because we have a lot of really great discussion left. Patrick, I have one last question for you about that pipeline. So what demographic shifts in Georgia do you predict will affect the K-12 to higher ed pipeline in Georgia?
Well, I think we are definitely having more diversity in the K-12 pipeline. I mean, it's here. It's definitely not everywhere. There are parts of Georgia that are still not very diverse. So it's really about making sure that we connect with all students no matter where they are, and finding a way to resonate on the global scale with students. Sometimes it's really easy. In a COP school, you might have students who speak 40 different languages. But in a South rural school, you might have only 2 or 3 languages present. But I think they all understand the importance of the global context of Georgia. That's where the narrative of, hey, you know, we've got the busiest airport in the world, even though Delta had a little loss this last quarter, they're still going to bounce back. But I mean, we have the 4th largest port in the world and growing fast. We have all this connective tissue that's bringing the world here. So I don't think the need is going to go away. I think we just have to continue to make an effort to just connect kids to the opportunities that are available to them. Less commonly taught languages is another area. You know, I can't find enough certified teachers. I'll just be honest with you. People who are really good at languages don't always choose teaching as their first career. So, I mean, I have to balance technology with what sometimes in our rural systems, we can't find a teacher for the upper level of the languages, so we have to leverage technology. There's just no other way to do it. You know what the largest department of the Georgia Virtual School is? You want to guess? It's world languages. You know why? Because there's many schools that can't offer these languages. If your kid or child goes to a school where they have 3 or 4 different languages at school, you're really in the upper level of what's offered here in Georgia, what can be offered. And that's not just Georgia. All 50 states have a shortage of world language educators. So we have to be more engaged with our heritage-speaking communities, more engaged with different parts of our community to put people on the path to becoming teachers, because teaching is still a valuable and worthwhile profession. Many of us are the children of teachers. We know what it brought us. It brings family stability, especially for immigrant families. I think that's really important for us, as to not discard when we talk about teacher induction pathways. Of course, we have to work to lower some of those bars and make it more accessible. Not only thinking about teacher certification in English, for example. You know, if you judge a fish on its ability to fly, it's going to fail every time, so let's test them in the water they actually swim in, right? That'd be good. So I think we just really have to be much more elastic in our thinking about harnessing the talents that are in our population already, and not being ever cognizant of the fact that we don't know everything. So we have to listen a lot and try to make those changes. But I will say, working with a government agency, it is different a lot of times from an institution in some ways. I always tell people that at my level of government, I'm the level of government that actually can get some things done. So yeah, there's some that are hard and rigid, sometimes at the upper top, and maybe that movement. But I think we, at these levels of government, regardless of what government institution it is, it's those people who manage programs that actually can put some of that. Now, we are fed by the upper decision makers, but we're grateful that in Georgia we are getting fed, so that's good.
Thank you. So I have a kind of a big question. I'm going to break it up a little bit. How has the enrollment of international students at your university changed in the past 5 years? And what are your predictions regarding international student enrollment for the next 5 years? And following on that, how does your reach extend beyond traditional international student populations?
Okay, excuse me. So I think many of you all know that Georgia Tech has a really large international student population. And oftentimes people say, what do you all do to recruit? We don't recruit necessarily. It's really about the institution's reputation. So students come there because Georgia Tech is well known in the international space. And so I didn't want to spend too much time on my institution, recognizing that there are many other institutions in the state. I took a look at Open Doors. The Institute for International Education provides a report every year of international student data. Who's coming? What are they studying? Where are they coming from? How are they funded? Are they married? Are they bringing children? All of that information is right at your fingertips with the IIE Open Doors report. And so in terms of international student enrollment, we are seeing some trends there. Our top countries are mostly the same. Right now, they're China, India, South Korea, Canada, Vietnam, Taiwan, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and Mexico. And very much the same 5 years ago, with the exception that Saudi Arabian students we're losing them. We're not having quite as many. They moved from 5 years ago, 44,432 students in the U.S. to 18,206 now. So that population is declining. Japan didn't make the list this year either, so their population is also declining. Whereas I do think one of the more recent trends that we're starting to see, and I think probably many at your institutions are seeing it as well, is that our Chinese student numbers are down pretty significantly. Nationally, they're down by 8.6%. So if you have a lot of your eggs in the Chinese student basket, it might be a time to really think about diversifying your international student recruitment efforts, because we are seeing declines, and those are coming from some of the socio-political tensions between the U.S. and China, as well as some of the challenges that we had as it related to anti-immigrant rhetoric within the last presidency. And so I will say that another trend that we're seeing is that Indian student enrollment is up by 8.9% nationally. So for the first time at Georgia Tech this year, we saw that the number of Indian students far exceeded the number of Chinese students that we have on campus. They've always kind of been neck and neck, and now they're pulling way ahead. And so I think that is something to be mindful of. You may see some additional needs for really being thoughtful about how to prepare students for the U.S. American classroom, how to prepare faculty for shifts in demographics with international students, how to prepare places like your food services to really accommodate changes to international student demographics on your campus. I did want to mention a few other things as it relates. Did you ask me about the future question too, where we're going in the future? Okay. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the future. So right now, we're seeing that international student enrollment nationally is up. It's up 9% in fall of 2022. We do a check-in in fall of 2022 with Open Doors. So that data is coming from there, 9% nationally. Last year when they did the same check-in, it was up by 4%. So we're seeing that we're bouncing back from the pandemic. As a result of international student enrollment increasing, we are seeing the number of international students participating in optional practical training, work authorizations after graduation increasing as well by 6% nationally. So for those of you, what is that? For those of you at your various campuses, what you're going to see as it relates to optional practical training and participating in work authorizations after graduation is that you need to really work with career services. You might want to look into how do you complement what career services is already doing with other platforms that really help support international student professional development in career connections. We are getting ready to partner with a really wonderful group called Interstride. You may have heard of them. It's a third-party provider that focuses on international student career development and navigating the U.S. American workplace as well as finding opportunities back home. So a really wonderful platform that we're going to add. In terms of other things, in terms of looking at what institutions are doing to really try and increase their international student numbers and keep them healthy, many are prioritizing outreach to India, Vietnam, Brazil, China, and to your point, U.S. American high schools. We do have many international students here in Georgia and all over the U.S. that are also very interested in studying at our institutions. So that's a domestic, and oftentimes when you go to armchair recruitment sessions on international student recruitment, they'll talk about, well, have you really looked at your local schools? Because there are a number of international students right here in Atlanta that might be interested in attending your institution. Other trends that we are seeing is the grad enrollment is increasing. So at the undergraduate enrollment level, they only grew by about 2% since the pandemic, and again, that's nationally across all institutional types as well. But grad enrollment is up by 18%. So really, some of the increase of the international student enrollment is at the grad level. In terms of where we're going in the next 5 years, the research in this area states that we're going to continue to grow. And so that's worldwide. So worldwide, they're predicting that international student mobility is going to continue to increase. What is changing is that there are more countries and institutions within other countries who want part of that market. So they are doing their best to really design programs for international students that are high touch, that offer many opportunities for international students to connect to professional and career development, that build really inclusive communities. And some of the ways that they're promoting this is by using their currently enrolled students to talk about what services and what opportunities are available at institutions. And so one of the things that I'll mention is that while they do predict that international student mobility is going to continue, just remember that you're going to be competing with more people in the market, more countries in the market. And so we may see declines if we can't really I think, trouble some of the ways that we approach the international student market. And really, we value their money, but oftentimes we're recruiting, we're trying to get them to our institutions so that we can get the out-of-state tuition. Whereas I think it really should be a more mindful approach. We should be thinking about, we're recruiting international students because they're bringing ideas from various parts of the world to our classrooms. They're sharing information with our students about things that our students would otherwise not be exposed to. And we really need to be careful that we understand that international students come with different needs than U.S. American students. Many of their needs are the same, but they also have different needs as well. And so when I was talking about food services, that's a big part of it, right? There's food, religion, cultural, all of those things need to be addressed at the institutional level, and making sure that you're creating connections for students, making sure that you're providing basic living necessities like access to food that they can eat within their religious requirements. And so all of that to say, I think it's time for the U.S. International educators like us and higher education administrators, that's what I'm trying to say, to really begin to trouble some of the ways that we think about recruiting international students, and make sure that if we're going to be bringing students here, we want them to really flourish during their time within the U.S., and we want them to leave their programs with us with a good understanding of not just their classroom experience, but of the U.S. American culture, because they've been able to connect with members of the community and with other students and really learn and benefit from their time in the U.S. So be prepared for continued growth, but more competition, and for students who become pickier and are looking for really a full service experience that's going to be best for them.
You're here.
Tammy, I think we have time for one more question, then we need to go to the Q&A. Exchange?
Yeah, let's jump to international virtual exchange. So earlier we briefly mentioned virtual exchange as an innovative tool. Tell us more about virtual exchange and what have been the most notable successes and challenges of adopting this mode of instruction at your institution, Farrah.
Sure. Okay. So faculty at Georgia State have been engaging with virtual exchange for years. Sometimes they knew that they were using virtual exchange in the classrooms, and sometimes they didn't know what it was called. So in 2019, the Office of International Initiatives put more formal structure around virtual exchange by way of a part-time position, and since then we've really seen it flourish. We work closely with the Atlanta Global Studies Center on our virtual exchange initiative, but we have identified champions across campus. We're tracking virtual exchange. We do a call for proposals to support faculty projects at least once a year, so they implement virtual exchange projects. We have in iCollege, we've created templates for faculty to use as guides. So if there's a new faculty in a discipline that wants to implement virtual exchange but doesn't know where to start, they can go look at the templates. We have a faculty teaching learning community that provides support ongoing for faculty to talk to those more experienced and gain guidance. We celebrate it during International Education Week. We have faculty panels, and we do one-on-one consulting. So this has really helped it grow significantly. From fall 2019, we had 105 students engaging with virtual exchange. In fall 2022, we had just under 1,300 students. And this spring, we had 860 students. So over 2,000 students this academic year engaging with virtual exchange. So the growth has been phenomenal. We actually have more students engaging with virtual exchange than study abroad right now. And I would say the challenge has been sustainability. So if you have identified a faculty champion in a discipline and they're using virtual exchange, maybe they're not teaching that course the next semester. And so how do you keep it going? So we've been talking to the colleges about how to implement a mandatory component within the academic programs. And I would say that the Robinson College of Business here has been our trailblazer in that area. They have created a mandatory course, senior level course in the BBA program, so that all students who graduate from that program have had a virtual exchange, which is wonderful. What else can I say about, what else do you want me to talk about? I've already forgotten. Anything
I think
else?
that's good. I think
Okay.
Dr. Togunde wants to talk about virtual exchange a little bit.
No, I'm going to switch and talk about what can we do to support international educators in an attempt for them to convince the policymakers to support global engagement on their campuses. We have this as one of the questions, so it is not random. I want the audience to know that. But the reason why I'm bringing this up is that often we find international educators at the intermediate level, even sometimes at the director level, getting frustrated. My provost is not doing anything. I keep telling my provost, we need this, we need that. My vice provost is not doing anything. So I want to offer some few tips that have really worked for us at Spelman College. And perhaps it may be helpful to some of us who grapple with that particular issue. I would say, in order to get support for campus internationalization, regardless of your position, use data and publication to convince the administrators. If your provost or your vice provost is not willing to include global education parameters in the strategic planning, find a very smart way to parade students' experiences and invite the president, invite the provost to come and listen to what students have to say regarding their experiences. From my experience, administrators tend to be moved very well when they listen to what the students say. Students have a persuasive way of conveying their experiences to the administration, and they listen. That's one. When I say use data to convince them, find a way to do it on an annual basis. How many students you send abroad? Much more importantly, you need to find an assessment mechanism. It may be difficult for your institution to have an assessment piece, but for us at Spelman College, we identify 2 learning outcomes, and we find strategic ways to ensure that intercultural competence, which is the primary goal, this is the learning outcome that we want our students to gain from their global engagement, is done. Alex Pierre was my former director of cultural orientation. There is a compulsory required course that every student planning to go abroad must take. So we look into 3 phases of student engagement when they are traveling abroad: before, during, and after. So this course will enable them to get a grasp of the 2 learning outcomes. When they go abroad, the journal. When they come back, they write a reflection. So the reflection is now assessed against a rubric. And at the end of the year, I will send an announcement to the entire campus. This is what is going on. But more importantly, use publication. And I'm going to end with this in case it's not self-advertisement, it's not self-whatever, but if you want to know about what we have done, there's a new publication out on the reflections of students, faculty, staff at Spelman College that have just published as a co-author, co-editor. So the faculty who are engaged in internationalization, they were able to write the reflections about how faculty-led programs, for example, has impacted their teaching and scholarship. There is also a publication on the development, assessment of study abroad. So we're able to document the impact. So the latter one is published, the Forum on Education Abroad. So I have 2 chapters in that one. One on faculty, one on student, demonstrating the impact. And what did I do? I announced to the president. I announced to the entire public. So something is happening in global education. So I give them a copy. And they feel, I say, wow, Spellman, this is what we're doing? I say, yes. So there is ROI, investment, return on investment. So these are some of the ways in which you can use data, you can use publication, get faculty involved, and then before you know it, the entire campus, the board of trustees will be behind you and ready to support you. In January, we had a board of trustees. I got 2 students from Rwanda program. They asked me, oh, we want to hear from students abroad. And then I put the 2 students in front of the board of trustees. The board was saying, wow, we need to run this program again. I said, this is just 5 students. Oh, let us run this program again. So international educators tend to be frustrated by lack of support. But there are little tangible things you can do that can turn things around. And I'm going to end there. So if you have any question, I'm ready to talk with you.
Yeah, do we have any questions from the audience? Do we?
Thank you again. Okay. Thought I was going. I think Dr. Togunde just took the word out of my mouth. The frustration that we feel as faculty and professionals in global education. I think we shouldn't forget about the political climate we find ourselves in at the national and state level, right? We're all doing all these wonderful things. We're kind of preaching to the choir, right? But then your Board of Regents, university system, they're getting the message from the politicians. That message filters down to your presidents, provosts, and so on. And that creates a chilling effect on faculty who feel that they're not supported, particularly when you're talking about global education in the context of non-Western destinations and subjects. How are you dealing with it? Because what you're saying about Spellman, I feel like sign me up. Is this a difference between private and public institutions in Georgia? Or how are you dealing with that? Because I am frustrated, okay? I am very frustrated. So I want to know how you're dealing with this talking and then action, DEI, global education, and all of these things. How are you handling that? Thank you.
I'd like to give a quick counterpoint real quick. You know, we have large institutions all in Atlanta represented. KSU is a big institution, well-funded. But, you know, as someone that's representing the USG, we have a lot of really small institutions across the state that have no international students and maybe one good-meaning faculty member that takes one group of students abroad somewhere a year. They have even less of a voice. But those institutions are also struggling with things like their enrollment has dropped 6 to 10%. They are having a dramatic cut in funding coming up. So we are talking about already well-resourced, well-placed institutions, and we are preaching to the choir. When we think about the state in general, we have a lot of schools that are struggling to provide even the smallest bit of global education or content to their students. So we have to kind of like take ourselves out of this vacuum that we're in and think about the whole state. In general, you know, Georgia Tech has a large international student population, and it's going to continue to grow, but we have campuses that their only international students are athletes. And we're going to start to lose those students because of we're being outpriced by health insurance and other requirements, and international students want to go to ranked schools. These schools aren't ranked. So when we think about, I know we're here to talk about Atlanta, but I'd also like to, let's think about the state in general. How do we grow international education throughout the state, keeping in mind what Noor just said, but also the other issues and pressures that our small schools face?
And that is a great segue into what I was going to say, because I represent the state. In my work, I think it is about resonance and finding the resonance for the audience that you're speaking to. In the metro area, it's really a different argument in many ways when it comes to economic development, global engagement. We're Atlanta, we're the city. This GDP of this city is greater than many states by itself. You know, how can you contain that, or how can you maintain that if you're not investing in international education for our domestic student audience? How can you maintain that leadership that you want and you're building the infrastructure for if you don't invest in the personnel to operate that infrastructure? But when I go to a rural community and I talk about, hey, what international opportunities do your students in K-12 have? Or even, I'll just give you this example because it's in my mind. Last week, I had a group of agriculture teachers from Germany go to Seminole County, far southwest corner of our state. It's a middle high school, so it's all connected because it's small. Around it is a farming community. And here I brought 6 German ag teachers to this school, and these people have never even seen a German walk through the door, or have heard about it, know that it's a country on a map that's blue normally, but they don't have any personal interactions with that. They have immigrant communities in their community, farm workers in a lot of cases, but they are also to some degree, and that brings me to the seal of biliteracy. I mean, the seal of biliteracy is championing, that's a nice word, multilingual learners and the ability to speak. And I'll just show that from the microcosm of nationally. In 2011, California created the first seal of biliteracy. Fast forward here to 2023 now. All 50 states have a seal of biliteracy. Why was that adoption so fast at the state level? And I'll tell you why. Competitiveness is a part of it. If I'm in a state that offers a seal of biliteracy and I'm next door to a state, the questions become, why aren't you doing that? And also the economic argument for that. It's about, you know, some of the joys, the greatest joys I've had are going to a Bulgarian school and actually talking to those students and the family members and say, the state of Georgia wants to recognize your students' ability in Bulgarian. We don't want them to lose that language and cultural connection. We want to celebrate it. And just the impact of that statement alone. So, I mean, for me, that's why I'm super passionate about my work. I know I'm in the right work. I don't know for how much longer, but I'm in it right now. But I would say that, yeah, I mean, we have to find the point of residence when it comes to international education that's doable, but also meaningful. I feel like that connection will last long because it's never about just connecting schools, it's about connecting communities. So the deeper you can spread the international connection beyond your students to your communities, to your businesses. You know, we had farm families hosting this group. We instantly won a lot of advocates for our international program in this very rural district. And when it comes to funding, this is their gem, because it's one way to say, hey, we are special. We have a program that no other high school in the state of Georgia has, and we have it right here in this little high school, middle school, in the middle of nowhere. And that's a point of pride, too, so that also encourages that. I mean, I get excited about these things. We're doing great things. There's a lot of passionate people. That's when I come to these places, I'm like, yes, yes, go, 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 go. But, you know, I know we have a tendency to feel like you feel, like I'm butting my head against the wall. I always take the approach of water, right? We flow where we can flow right now, but we make the way wider for those behind us, right? So over time, I think, here's the good news, I think momentum is on our side, because we're waking up to the repercussions. Domestically, we're going to need more of these reasons, but in all the work fields, you're going to need more people with language and intercultural ability. They're going to have to be sensitive to people from other backgrounds, religious beliefs, all of these things. So, and even if they're not going to stay in Georgia, you know, they can grow up in a hometown.
We want them to.
We
That's the
want them
workforce
to.
development piece, so we can bring international companies to the whole state of Georgia,
Right.
and they can hire workers from our straight out of high school
Yes.
that have a global mindset already. So
Yeah, no,
we
I'm
want
sorry.
them to
Yes, you're
stay.
right. Yeah, I get excited, but it's true. Yeah, but I guess my point is we want them, any student in Georgia who grows up, no matter what their situation is, I want them to have access to a meaningful international experience. It doesn't have to be in person, could be virtual. We have to be flexible. Again, it goes back to teachers. I've got to find teachers. I've got to be able to staff my classroom. We can't find bus drivers. Imagine trying to find a science teacher in Spanish that's certified.
Thank you, Patrick. Well, I want to thank all our panelists. We have so much more to say, but we don't have any more time, and it's 4:30 on a Friday afternoon. So I want to thank everyone. Oh, we have one more announcement. Everyone can come downstairs, and we're going to take a photograph. And anything else?
If you want to continue the conversation, there is an optional happy hour at Wild Leaf Brewery, and I can give you instructions on how to get there downstairs in the atrium.
Do these microphones come with us for the karaoke hour?
Just yours. Thank you.